if you write a book that really is you, your thoughts, your opinion, your perspective, your heart, it's kind of like walking around naked. I mean, it is very revealing and vulnerable and uncomfortable. And I think it has to be something that you really want and need to do.
Sherry Walling works with entrepreneurs. She runs her own businesses. She has just finished her second book. Your first book, The Entrepreneur's Guide to Keeping Your Shit Together, was hugely helpful for me when I was in a tough grind. And to me, it was the definition of a useful book where I had a problem. I'm like, I am struggling. I found a book. I was like, this book solved my problem, or at least, helped solve it. So thank you for that. And to start us off, it's tough, right? Like every entrepreneur's journey is different. And yet when reading it, I felt like you were speaking directly to me. Like, how were you able to get these experiences out of your head and into the pages in a way that can reach the reader like this?
Well, it was about you because I can actually read your mind. So this is an intervention where we're going to talk about that. No, in all seriousness, one of the challenges of entrepreneurship is that we are so unique, right? Entrepreneurs are people who see things that don't already exist and then do the work to bring them into the real world by creating businesses, by building teams, all the things that we do. So in a lot of ways, we're outliers. We're people that don't like the rules and we like to be quite unique in the way that we think and operate. There is, though, sort of a dirty little secret in that we're not that special. Like there are some patterns in the ways that we think, in the challenges that we have. And I happen to have a position in life where I talk with lots of entrepreneurs kind of all day, every day. And so I get to do some of that pattern recognition. And that's what we put in the book. The book was co-authored with my husband, Rob, who's been an entrepreneur for, like forever. And so over time, you just see these trends and you learn about what's helpful to people. And that's what we wrote down. So I'm glad it was helpful to you.
Everything you say rings true, and yet so many authors could or would say the same. Somehow the message fails to kind of leap off the page. The example I always think of is books about chess. They're written by chess masters who coach lots of chess students. They have seen the same patterns, but you read them and it's like, I can tell that you're good at this, and yet I'm learning nothing from you. Did you have a process to make sure that it was landing with readers?
A lot of the book started as podcast transcripts. So, Rob and I started a podcast called Zen Founder. And as we were recording episodes, we had a sense of which episodes were landing with people, right? Where we'd get notes or comments from the audience, where people would reach out to us and say, oh, that was really helpful. And so in a way, that was the first round of editing for the book. So we took our best podcast episodes, had them transcribed, and cleaned them up into book chapters. That's kind of a lot more work than it sounds, but there was this kind of crowdsourcing vetting process that happened somewhat unintentionally because we were trying out the material before we released the book.
There's a difference between a collection of podcasts or essays and a cohesive whole. So after you kind of knew which bits resonated, what percentage of the process was done and what was left to do?
We did have an editor who was super helpful in helping us think through where we needed to add stories. So I think the thing that is powerful about this book and the thing that makes it work, in my opinion, is that we know lots of stories about lots of entrepreneurs. So I could share a psychological construct that I know, that my colleagues know, but then anchor it to a real life, real world entrepreneur who had the thing happen. And I think that helps bridge the gap between theory and practice, between expertise and real world application. And that's where just our, collective years in the trenches of entrepreneurship become really helpful.
Another powerful side effect, I assume this is both from being in the scene and also from your work working directly with entrepreneurs, is none of the stories were stories I'd heard before. Often you read a business book, you get to the first anecdote or case study, you're like, oh, it's one of these. It's like rehashing all the classic examples. Yeah. And it was so nice to read your experience. It's firsthand, it's new stuff. And I guess there's no shortcuts to get that sort of stuff.
There's lots of stories of the famous entrepreneurs and the struggles that they've gone through, but we really wanted to honor our audience, which tends to be bootstrapped. These are not unicorn companies mostly. They're like donkey companies, but they're hard workers and they're consistent and they show up and they get shit done. So I think those are the people that we know, that we bump elbows with. Those are the people that I serve in my business. And so those are really the stories we had access to.
I think there's a lot of parallels between the business journey and the book journey. They're both pretty long. You're building this product is hard and it's emotional as well. It's personal. So one of the quotes from your book that maybe you can translate some lessons. You say inside of this intense pressure is the final core value, the quest for meaning. Like writing a book is so meaningful, but there's also, I think none of us are completely free of the flip side of these. Like, how do you think about this with such a personal project as a book?
It really is this like ultimate exercise in vulnerability. If you write a book that really is you, your thoughts, your opinion, your perspective, your heart, it's kind of like walking around naked. I mean, it is very revealing and vulnerable and uncomfortable. And I think it has to be something that you really want and need to do. There are certainly folk who are kind of book machines and they have a process and they spill out ideas and those ideas are great. And I've never been able to write that book. Maybe someday I will. I'll just get really good at machine writing. Both of the books that I've written are very much from my heart and mind and life. And it puts everything on the table. And I think entrepreneurs understand that risk where you're leveraging all of your relationships, all of your savings, all of your favors, everyone you know, and you're saying to them, hey, I made this thing. Can you read it, buy it, celebrate it, talk about it, pitch it? It's so many asks and it's so much risk. And entrepreneurs have to kind of get comfortable with that. You have to believe in your thing enough to say, not only am I calling in a favor, but I actually think this will be helpful to you. Like I want to also give you something of value. And I believe it has value, which is what fuels my ability to ask.
Can you give any suggestions for when we feel these things, the imposter syndrome, the anxiety, the overwhelm? And I've seen different authors tend to get stressed by different parts of the process. For some people, the blank page is huge anxiety, and then the final steps is just a checklist. Whereas I'm almost the opposite, where I find my anxiety increasing the closer I get to publication.
I think it's a little bit of the hero's journey. I think you can know that it's going to be hard, and that doesn't save you from the difficulty of it. So having a sense of what's hard for you and resourcing up. I'm like you. I love writing. The blank page does not scare me. I'm like, give me a cup of coffee and a quiet Saturday and a blank page and I'm a happy kid. But the idea of selling the marketing copy, like all that stuff makes my inner introvert have a little panic attack. It's like, oh, I gotta be out there. So I know that about myself. And that means that like I've used my resources to engage people to help me with that process. I have people that help me with the marketing copy at this point. I have people that help me build websites. That's where I've invested because that's the help I most need in order to support this project being successful. Another piece of it is at some point you are in service to your book. You're in service to your work. You're in service to your company. In some way, it's not really about you or how you feel about it. It's about the thing that you committed to making and your responsibility to see that through. So I think that kind of helps me in the moments where I feel my shy person or my ego, whatever it is, just get agitated. I try to pull myself as Sherry, the human, out of the story and realize I'm entrusted to this work and it's entrusted to me and I have to see it through.
One of the tricks I use for that, I'm not famous for my ability to complete projects, right? And with books in particular, the trick I use is I try to get it out to beta readers like aggressively early. And I find as long as there's people who are receiving value, well, one, that unhooks my imposter syndrome because I'm not trying to convince myself it's valuable. I'm seeing that there's value. And then also people are like, when's the next version coming? When are you adding that chapter? And I find that that's enough to pull me through to kind of get me to the finish line.
I think that's a great strategy. With the first book, that sense of doing that with the podcast, having some interaction with the material, with the audience before releasing the book was super helpful. This second book that I'm releasing in July, I shared many sections of it with a lot of my consulting clients, members of my family, my friends. So there was this inner circle of people who were interacting with the material and gave me this bump of affirmation that says, yes, this is valuable. This is not just you publishing your journal. Like this is actually in service to others. That's what I care about as a psychologist and as a human. So that helps me get out of my own way, like for you.
The Amazon page is up. It must be quite exciting. Does it feel different doing it the second time than the first?
A lot of things feel different about this book. It's a very different book. I'm working with a traditional publisher. I self-published my first book. It was a lot of different things. One notable thing is that we did the pre-launch with a circus show. So that was pretty fun.
When we were setting up this conversation, you said, I've got a circus going on in the most literal sense possible. And I was like, surely she still means not literally. But then it turns out you meant trapezes and everything.
The whole deal. We had a fire performer. We had the full range of human circus. No
Amazing.
animals.
You have quite a lot on your plate, I would say. The understatement of the year.
It's a circus.
Exactly. You're jumping in and out of businesses. You're working with clients as a coach. You're doing your own stuff. What's your process for actually doing the work on the book?
I really like to write early in the morning. The hours of 5:30 a.m. to 8:30 a.m. are my favorite writing time. That gets tricky because I have children and they like to be fed breakfast and be awake for school on time. So when I'm writing intentionally, I have to get real creative about carving out that time. I actually do a lot of writing on the weekends because I wake up really early before my family. And then I will set aside writing days. Sometimes I will go stay in a hotel for a couple days if I'm getting ready for a big deadline, or if I feel like I want to read the whole book and work on it as a whole unit. I find that I have to remove myself from my life for those moments. I think it's helpful that I really like writing. You know, it doesn't feel like, oh, I have to go do this now. I enjoy it. It feels meaningful.
Did you always enjoy writing? Do you enjoy writing about any topic?
Probably not about every topic, but for the last 15 years, I really pretty much get to choose what I write about. So that's helpful. But again, there's lots of book things that I don't enjoy that do require a lot of time. So on my list right now in my life is to pitch podcasts. And that is not fun. That is just a discipline. That is a list that I have to get through. I carve it out certain hours on my calendar, and it's just an appointment with the task. The self-discipline of being responsible for it. It does help that I have a team that's sort of looking over my shoulder and is like, did you do that yet? Did you do that yet? Did you do that yet? A little bit of social pressure and reinforcement helps me to get things done when I don't want to do them.
We talked to an author who said, in addition to running his own weekly podcast, he shows up as a guest on 200 podcasts per year. And I was like, who are you? And apparently he just took one day per week and he would basically just do like 8-hour blocks of just podcast. And it blew my mind. If I do one, I'm sort of wiped out for the day before and the day after. I want to show up fresh and full of energy. I'm definitely on the introvert side of things. As you mentioned, you are also. So how do you work that into your day when you're shifting from the writing?
It goes in phases. So there's a writing phase, which has a different sort of schedule. And now I'm in this like push for launch phase. I'm 6 weeks out from launch. So the 2 months before launch and the 2 months after, I clear my schedule as much as possible. And I carve out certain days that are available for podcasts and media and all that stuff. And you do get better at it. So a few months ago, I did a project with Intuit QuickBooks, and I went to New York and was in a TV studio and did 25 interviews in a row about entrepreneur mental health. My brain was absolute mush, but I surely got my message down. And I got good at it. It was like trial by fire. And so I think when you do, I don't have the aspiration to do 200 this year, but when you do a lot of it, it gets easier. You get practiced at it. You figure out which words match which questions and, get your message down in a way that I think is a helpful learning curve for those of us who find it pretty overwhelming to do interviews.
It's better than having to do it in the real world like they used to. You have to get in like a bus and drive around America.
You have to brush your hair. I mean, come on.
Yeah. And what's the experience having self-published your first book, which was super successful? The ratings is close to 5 stars, about as perfect as you can get. And you did that by yourself, obviously with your support team. And now you're working with a traditional publisher.
The reason that we self-published the first book is that Rob and I really would know that audience. We have access to that audience. That's who listens to my podcast, to his podcast. That's who attends MicroConf. That's who I serve as an entrepreneur. So it felt very accessible that we know the people we would need to know in order to get on the podcast and create the buzz. That felt like we had entry points that we needed. With this new book, it's written really for a broader audience. It's not specifically focused on entrepreneurs, although it has a lot of value for entrepreneurs. There were lots of things that I felt like I didn't know how to do or how to access certain people. So the idea of working with a publisher was intriguing. I also kind of wanted to do it for just a different experience. I wanted to see what they had to offer. I will say that the editorial process was very helpful. They really helped me to think about how to make my book more applicable. And we ended up adding all of these like exercises and practical things that they thought would help it sell. I don't know that I would have gotten there by myself. I don't know if the process of going with a publisher will pay off in sales yet. I'll tell you in like 6 months, right? We have to run the experiment.
I like that way of thinking about it. It's very pragmatic. Publishers and also venture capitalists in the startup world, I don't like when they're seen as an aspirational goal, but obviously they have a lot of practical value. And
yeah.
It's like a trade, right? It's a contract. And if you feel like you're getting good value for that contract and they're a good partner, but I hate when people think like, I want to write a book and so I need a publisher. I'm always like, wait, you don't. You might want a publisher, but no one needs a publisher. You can choose it. There's all manner of advantages.
I absolutely agree. I don't feel like this is a better book, or I feel like I have different marketing needs and I needed a different sounding board. But if I were to write another book that is targeted towards entrepreneurs, which I am outlining right now, I think I would probably self-publish it because again, it makes sense given the channels that I have and the people that I know and what felt accessible to me.
All of like the ways we get inside our own head and mess with ourselves. Sometimes in the authors community, people go like, I feel so nervous, therefore I must be doing the wrong thing, or it must not be the right book for me. We sometimes find ways to talk ourselves out of it. Or for example, we work up the courage to send it out to that first batch of beta readers and like no one leaves meaningful feedback.
It's just part of the human experience to go through the roller coaster of this process. I wouldn't want it any different. I want all the feels. I want the sense of like deep accomplishment. And I understand the value of the sense of inferiority and terror that goes along with releasing something that feels important. I do think, if anything, I maybe have a little bit more practice or insight into being very proactive about anticipating what kind of support and strategies I'll need. So, for example, this current book is very personal, and I have felt like I want to take the attention off of me and my story and my family a little bit. And so the way that we launched the book was with this show that celebrated lots of people's stories and was a fundraiser for NAMI, which is the National Alliance for Mental Illness. And so I read from the book, but it became a piece of the narrative where lots of other voices were joining in and lots of other performers and stories were celebrated. And that felt so much better to me because I want this book to be shared and to connect with the community of people who are struggling with maybe mental health issues or addiction issues. And so instead of doing the traditional way of like hosting a reading or a book launch party where I prance around in a cool outfit and shake hands and sign books, we did it a different way that felt like more of a community offering. And that was very, very helpful to me in my psychology. And I think was super successful in both promoting the book, but also celebrating all these other people.
You mentioned the podcast book tour. Are there any others that you consider your go-tos? Do you consider reliable options for book marketing?
It's just getting in front of as many people as possible, which of course is part of the podcast deal. I have done a lot of conference speaking, sometimes in stages where they don't really allow or support you doing a hard pitch from the stage, which, I totally understand. Nobody wants to go to a conference and just have people sell you stuff. But I think the more that people interact with me, the easier it becomes to be like, oh, and my book, and you mention it, you make it part of the conversation, and then people are curious. I don't think I have any really great tricks and strategies. Even this circus show that we did sounds like it's great media antic, but it really just flowed from who I am and from the community that I know and the people that I care about. And so it's cheesy, but I just think the more authentically you can put yourself and your story in front of eyeballs, that's what good marketing is.
Also, after I read your book, I immediately wrote a blog post about it, and that wasn't prompted. It was just, it had delivered value to me. And that's the organic word of mouth and the recommendation loop that you get from solving someone's problem or helping them out. Anyway.
Thanks for doing that, by the way. I'll send you that payment later.
It's all for me. I need those clicks.
I was looking at your book here. It says, are you wasting precious time? I'm like, yeah, I think we all are. Dumping energy into the wrong things. Can you give me some insight on this? Because this is a problem with me.
just a little task that I use with my consulting clients is to ask them to record the high point of their day and the low point of their day every day, and to keep that in the same kind of notebook or journal, and to do it for months, years, the long term. And then periodically go back and look and read the data, as I like to say, because it gives you really good information into the low points are usually the things that kind of suck your energy. I mean, some of them are unavoidable, right? Taxes and kid tantrums, like that's just going to happen. But a lot of times we're spending time, or there are things on our schedule, things in our life that are just really not what we like. And reading that very individualized data about where we're finding that spark of life and energy, and the things that are taking that spark of life and energy, can be really helpful in helping us make decisions about where to spend our time and what to outsource if we need to, what to stop doing. So it's a little practice, but I've found it to be super helpful.
I've been cleaning up a lot of the social connections, such as the energy vampires, positive energy vampires.
So you know that there's power, right? I think it's really, really important to be protective of your energy. I have a few causes that are near and dear to my heart, and I will give my time and my money very specifically toward them. I love anything that's an intersection between mental health and the arts. So those are the organizations I support. That's where I spend my time. But people ask me for stuff all the time. You know, people ask me for free conference talks. And as I've become clearer about the value of my own time, it's so much easier to say yes. I am giving all of this energy in this direction, and no, to all these other things that are an energy drain, that are neither restorative for me, they don't pay me money, and they are not kind of the passion of my heart. So I give energy to passion, to things that pay me, and to things that give me energy back. If it doesn't fall in that category, then I don't do it. I just say it really honestly, which is to say, for this season or this year, the only pro bono work that I'm doing is focused on this topic. Or this year, I'm partnering with NAMI, the National Alliance for Mental Illness. That's where I'm giving my energy. I'm not doing any other things.
I got an amazing email from Derek Sivers. We've been chatting about some book things. I basically made a small request, and he sent me back, and he's like, hey, this book I'm working on is harder than I expected. So until it's done, I'm just saying no to everything. And that was basically his email. And he's like, if you want to know more, I wrote a blog post explaining it. He linked me, and I was like, I get that. I respect that. And
right. Every creative gets that. I'm like in the closet with my book, doing nothing else.
For my own writing and my books, I've realized I can only get the book done if I give it my best hours. So that's the prioritization. I don't tend to delete everything, but in my day, certain hours are way better than other hours. And those are where my creative work happens. And so if I'm serious about a book, it's like, well, I got to give it those hours, or it's not going to move forward. It's hard because I find that there's other things I want to do, like business building drains from the same resource. There's any number of things that pull from those best hours. At least while the book's in motion, the book is going to be my top priority, my top project.
Sometimes I like to think about energy in the same way you would think about money too, right? This hour costs me this much. You can calculate it based on your hourly rate or whatever. But if you think about the energetic cost, the investment that you're making in any conversation, in any activity, you want to make sure that you're actually okay with allocating your energy that way. So if you're all in on a book, yes, it gets your big investment, right? You're spending money, you're spending time, your best energy on it. And other things are second, because unless you have infinite money or infinite time, which I don't think is anyone on this call, you have to make choices.
I was curious of how you decided your pricing for the entrepreneur guide that you have. Do you have any psychology around how you decided?
So the book has been out for a little bit. It was very inexpensive at the beginning. I think we did the 99-cent ebook thing for launch for a period of time. And then the price has adjusted a little bit over time. People who are really good at the business side of this are really strategic about that. I just kept an eye on other books that were in the same sphere and how much they were charging and priced it accordingly.
For the benefit of anyone else, right now the Kindle's $9.99 because Amazon cares about that final cent. And the paperback's what, $17, $18? I think useful books, right? Charge something.
So when you're self-published, you can set the price. which is nice because then there's a whole pre-launch campaign strategy. It's 99 cents, jump on, everyone can afford that, leave a review. And now I don't get to do that with the new book because I don't get to set the price and they aren't going to reduce even the ebook for a lower fee. It takes a lot of money to put these books together. So I don't mind getting $9 instead of $1 for my work.
I think there's some negative signaling in some cases when the prices get too low. You can't charge what a book is worth, unfortunately. Like I probably would have paid $1,000 for The Entrepreneur's Guide to Keeping Your Shit Together, Sherry's first book, because that was the value it had to me. But like you can't really get away with charging $1,000 for a book, even if it's worth it. So you're constrained, but I see a lot of authors, especially self-published authors, they think that the solution to not getting noticed is to be cheaper. But that's like saying that people aren't buying my product, so I'm going to throw it in the bargain basement bin. And you may be right, some people grab it, but are they the right people? And I would look for other solutions first. I'd say, am I positioning it wrong? Am I describing it wrong? Do I need to get out there and hustle the podcast? Like, Sherry, you're super well known. You've got your own audience and you're still doing the work of building this seed audience.
I know that people write books for lots of reasons. The Entrepreneur's Guide, the first book was in some ways lead gen, right? It established, this is what I think, this is what I know, this is what I have to offer the world. And also I have a consulting practice. So it's a piece of a funnel. But I do think that when people are so focused on books as their top of funnel and they price them at 99 cents, that it just sort of cheapens the whole conversation. I don't have much interest in paying 99 cents for a book. I would rather pay more for something that's quality. And I feel like when an author, again, I can appreciate this might not be good business advice. So I'm talking psychologically, when an author is willing to part with their work for so little money, I feel a little like, do you care about this? Is this valuable to you? So, you counterbalance that. Obviously I do a podcast every week and I do that for free and I'm happy to do that. But for the book, I think you should charge a fee that feels like it's commensurate with some of the value that it offers.
And I also think for nonfiction, when I'm reading it, it's pretty common that I'll buy a book, read the first 10 pages and then throw it away or donate it or recycle it or whatever.
I hope you recycle it at least.
At least, yeah. Because I feel like you pay for nonfiction twice. Like you pay the cover price and then you pay again with your time to read it or reread it and study it, implement it. And it's different for a novel. I think people's math for novels is like entertainment hours per dollar in most cases. So the same way they think about Netflix or video games. But for nonfiction, I think the math is leverage. It's like value received per hour invested in this thing. It's not like dollar per page math anymore. A lot of the best practices in nonfiction have been accidentally adopted from fiction, even when it doesn't really apply.
I'm of two minds about this, to be honest. On one hand, I love that publishing is now so accessible, that people who want to write a book, have an idea, want to do the work to write the book can get it out in the world. That is phenomenal. I think it's equalized access to ideas and words in a way that is great for the world. On the other hand, there are just like lots of books. And in some ways, I wish there was a little bit more like vetting around quality and purpose. And that's kind of what traditional publishing used to do. I'm not sure that they really do that anymore. Unfortunately, one of the things that was so interesting about working with a traditional publisher was the process of pitching them and, writing the proposal, all the things. They were very concerned about my very minimal Instagram following. And I was like, I get it. Also, like, I'm a doctor, like I'm super qualified to write this book. It kind of hurt my heart a little bit in terms of the metrics that get you attention in the world. I only have like 1,000 followers on Instagram and it almost cost me my book deal, but we pulled it together. We pulled it through.
Happy to hear it. It's funny. People know my view on this, but I don't think there's good ways to predict book success ahead of time, at least certainly not from a publisher's perspective. An author can do it a little. You help enough readers, you understand what they care about. And you're like, yeah, if I package up that help between two covers, they will also value that help in book form. There's ways you can do it as an author, but how does a publisher know? So they look for these quantifiable metrics, and audience is very quantifiable. Now that you've gone through the book thing, when you're reading other people's books, like what do you notice that seems like a clear blunder or drives you crazy?
I stand in salute to anybody who gets a book out. I don't have a deeply critical eye, I gotta be honest, because I just get it and know the blood, sweat, and tears that go into it.
I heard some authors say that anyone who finishes a manuscript has a bit of the heroic in them because it's such an ordeal just to get it to that stage.
Some folks that I know are in my sphere, I watch, and I think they move on from their book too soon. soon. It's like a thing that they do, but then they're like talking about a new thing a few months later. And books deserve some space in life and time. Sometimes there's just that big push for the launch and you get it out there and it's so much work and you're kind of exhausted. And I think we all have that point where we're like, I'm super over this. Like, I don't want to look at this book. I don't want to talk about this book. I hate everything to do with this book, even if it's like our most precious book, baby. But we get to this point, we're just tired of it. And I think that's a good time to take a vacation, give it a pause, but not necessarily abandon it altogether. And I think sometimes people get to that fatigue point and then they don't come back to it. And that kind of truncates the story more than it needs to be.
And what would your advice there be? Is it a pacing issue? Is it a grit issue?
I actually do think it's a vacation issue. It is literally the buildup of fatigue. My book launches in July. We're taking a family vacation at the end of August, and I'm going off the grid. And I'm not going to talk about the book, think about the book, interact with the book. And people who want to talk to me about it are just going to have to wait till the first week of September. And that is going to be a really, really, really good pacing because there's this 6 weeks of intensity before book launch. There's a 6 weeks of intensity right after book launch. Then I get a clear break and then I can come back to the launch and book conversation with hopefully a fresh set of eyes. So I think some anticipation and planning around that is really helpful. Most of us can't go all out for months and months at a time. It's just not good for us.
It's actually one of my favorite things about books. Like I do software also. And software, if you put it down and you go away for a few months, you come back and like you have no business anymore. Whereas you can set a manuscript down and then come back to it after a pause. And I've also found that really helpful during the feedback stage because you desperately want the negative feedback, but it piles up.
Yeah. The folks that just publish a lot really quickly, I'm confused and in awe and wonder how that works because I feel like the places where I've set the book down and it's had some time to breathe have felt really important. So, the time when it's with the editor and there's nothing for me to do for 6 weeks or 8 weeks and I just have to wait, then I come back to the book with fresh eyes. And so I think the ability to see your own work with freshness is super valuable and is probably why it's okay that the book process takes so long because you're in it, you're totally immersed. And then there's a break and then you go back and you kind of interact with it at different phases, which I have found personally to be very helpful.
I love it. Your new book, Touching Two Worlds, as you mentioned, is personal. It's about grief. Are there any lessons from either book that you think would be relevant and helpful?
I think both of my books are about how to stay fully present when you're in the midst of really hard things. So whether you're building a business, whether you're putting yourself out there professionally, or whether you are in what is an inevitable phase for all of us at some point or another, a stage of grief where you've had a loss or there's some chaos in your personal life, and you're still trying to put your best work forward into the world. That's the question that I'm most curious about. Everyone who is a creative who is trying to do their work, even though life is hard and really shitty sometimes. I think I just want to offer a word of encouragement that if you keep going, you can do the kind of work that you find most meaningful, despite all manner of disruption and heartache.
It's hard though, man. If it gets tough, is it just step away or is there a toolkit for dealing with the tough times? Because we were talking the other day with one of our writing groups and someone was saying like, yeah, the last couple of weeks have been real tough. And we were saying that on the timescales of a book or the timescales of a business, it's almost inevitable that somewhere in there, life or work or something's going to go crazy, the whole world.
Yeah.
So is it just like step away and wait for it to get back to normal?
I feel like that's your fuel, right? I've written about all of my painful, hard things, have been grateful to be able to double down and throw my energy and attention into a project when my personal life was in a lot of pain. I lost my dad to cancer and my brother to suicide within 6 months of each other. It's just a very difficult, chaotic time. And I did some really great work in that season, not because I was avoiding it, but because it was nice to be able to shift out of brokenhearted daughter into clear professional psychologist who likes to write and make things. I think the wisdom is knowing when you need to take a break and set it aside and give the attention to your body, to your family, to your friendships, to your dog, just go out, be in the trees. And when it's time to say, okay, my heart is broken, I am distracted, but I'm going to know that I can put that down and pick it up again. And right now I'm going to give myself permission to go all in on my work, which is also also a really helpful strategy.
I think everyone should read The Entrepreneur's Guide to Keeping Your Shit Together. I think, freelancer, creative, author, entrepreneur, how can we help you with Touching Two Worlds, your upcoming book? Are you still consulting? How do we support you, work with you, help you, continue learning from you?
I mean, you all know as authors, like pre-orders are helpful, reviews are super helpful, sharing the book is wonderful. So the first book is called The Entrepreneur's Guide to Keeping Your Shit Together, How to Run Your Business Without Letting It Run You. The title was suggested by my then 11-year-old. And I was like, where did you learn that language? And he was like, from my father. And I was like, fine, whatever. Thank you for the title suggestion. And the new book is called Touching Two Worlds, A Guide for Finding Hope in the Landscape of Loss. Any love for both of those projects would be amazing. I guess apparently follow me on Instagram. That might be the fact that determines whether I ever get to write a book again. I'm at Sherry Walling on Instagram and Twitter, and I'm all over the internet. You can find me.
I assume you read and something.
I read good, Rob.
Yeah. Can you read, Sherry? We've been building up to the tough questions. I need to know.